My name is Varshit, and now we are going to discuss the topic called a note on fixed cost. Well, the better and the more redefined the tools at hand, the greater the temptation to use them for purposes for which they are not adequate. The set of theoretical tools supplied by the apparatus of cost curves is very likely to be misused in this fashion in handling certain questions of the moment. The role of fixed overhead in the price system is a case in point. The fact that the average cost curve, including fixed charges, reaches its minimum at a scale of production, which is not realized in terms of depression, and therefore that the actual output is produced at high average cost plays a fundamental part in a great many practical theories. It seems worthwhile to reconsider the real implication of our cost curves for the questions. While the including fixed charges for a product, it reaches the minimum to maximum scale of production by aiming the production and by aiming the sales furtherly and not realized in terms of depression, and therefore the actual output is produced at high average cost, which means they considering a more profits. Fixed costs are fixed for short periods. The short run analysis of supply deals with relationship between supply price and the number of units produced by existing plants without adaptations of their equipment to changes in output or price. For example, a product is manufactured by some units is called as a short run, whereas the product is manufactured more than their estimated items is known as long run. The curve of average fixed cost runs negatively to the x axis since a fixed amount divided by an increasing number of units must always show decreasing values of average cost. That curve is of course a rectangular hyperbola, that is x into y is equal to c. The negative slope of the average fixed cost curve gives to the average total unit cost, which means the production and the figured cost is known as the average total unit cost, and it is the total curve always a shape which shows a considerable negative part. Only after the optimum output has been reached does the average total cost curve turn upward because of increasing direct cost. If the product owners has increased the price of the product, then it reaches to downfall or maybe profitable zone. Mostly it goes on negative zone due to the directly increasing of price for the product. Only after the optimum output has been reached does the average total cost curve turn upwards because of increasing direct cost. Well, only the optimum output is when you increase the price of the product, then the people choose an alternative product. Impressed by the large negative part of the curve, one is sometimes tempt to speak of the economics of spreading overhead and what is more important for the present purpose, to assume that the height of fixed charges has an effect upon price and output. The first is misleading, the second definitely wrong. When you increase the price of a particular product for some other days, the people will choose definitely an alternative ways to purchase the product, and while they impressed by their by your product, then they will initiate to buy more price, but in more terms they won't do that, so the definitely go for the other product. Quarterly Journal of Economics. In the short run, the supply curve is determined only by the marginal cost curve. The decision of entrepreneur whether or not to produce one unit more or less is influenced only by the consideration whether or not the market price exceeds or falls short of the increment of total cost of producing the unit concerned, fixed cost being fixed, overhead therefore to be paid anyway. Direct cost is the only constitute of the increment or marginal cost curve. Neither The extent for the existence of fixed cost influences the marginal cost curve, its shape or its position. While in the short run, the supply curve is determined by only the marginal cost, and whereas the the entrepreneurs or produce one unit more or less is influenced by the consideration whether the price and whether the implementation process or else market price exceeds or falls out of incremental of total cost. Journal of Economics. In a given plant, that is fixed equipment being given, the marginal cost curve is derived only from direct cost factors. It is misleading to imagine the economics of spreading overhead as a case of decreasing cost, since the course of marginal cost curve and hence the decision of the entrepreneur to produce are not influenced by the fixed cost. If he is relieved of all fixed charges, imagine that in a fancy new system, all overhead costs are paid out of public funds. His price and production policy is not changed. If there are no fixed charge, evidently there is no curve of average fixed cost, and the curve of average total unit cost has no longer its considerable negative extent, and there is no decreasing cost but up to a certain point and increasing quantity rent. It means in a fixed equipment the production will be done, and the marginal cost it will be from direct cost factors, and it may mislead to economics of spreading by the company or else the factory, which leads to, and spreading of overhead implies that it is possible to produce and to sell additional units at a price greater than direct marginal cost of production. This margin is said to defray a part of the fixed burden. Would anything be changed if there were no burden? No fixed overhead, not at all. Instead of sharing overhead, the additional units of output would yield a rent. The adjustment of the volume of production to the position and shape of marginal cost and its curve and to intersection. When the curve of marginal receipts, that is, the price line in the pure computation, it takes place independently of any fixed charges. The fixed equipment will always be a determining factor for the short run supply. The fixed charges never, if one understands overhead as technological term, the phase economics of spreading overhead is right. If one underestimates its a financial term as a cost term, the pairs is misleading. The objective of the theory of cost is explain the relation between cost, price, and output. The theory presupposes that entrepreneurs, under given circumstances, act in a certain way. The assumption of rational behavior on the part of entrepreneurs, that is, the assumption that they are trying to maximize profit or minimize the loss, is the basis of our cost curve reasoning. Is the assumption perhaps more fictitious, more fictitious and unreal? If the entrepreneur is under the pressure of heavy burden and a weak demand, there is, I think, no reason for such belief. We have, however, to distinguish between competitive and monopolistic entrepreneurs. The theory does not require a very high degree of rationality from a competitive entrepreneur. For him, the matter is very simple. He has to pay the fixed items anyway. Any cent he can gain by selling at a price which exceeds direct cost will help him to bear the fixed burden. Mainly, the theory of cost is to explain the relationship between the cost, price, and the product output, and which is that entrepreneurs under given the circumstances to in a certain way. For that, the cost curve reasoning is made for the entrepreneurs for to try to maximum profit or to minimize the loss. And if the entrepreneur is under the pressure of heavy burden and a weak demand, and there is no reason for such belief, he will therefore produce as much as long as there is any margin between price and direct cost. He will do the same whether the burden is large or small. He will prefer to have a pot of fixed outlays covered than to lose them all. It is true that if among Many competing entrepreneurs, some are not intelligent enough to understand, but the situation and shut down their work because of a price below average cost. The reason still holds, and if what is so improbable as to be almost ridiculous, the number of competitive entrepreneurs who act against common sense is so great that the restriction is supply affects price sustainability. This very effect on price will induce them to resume the work, and then with the prices again pressed down, the produce may repeat itself. We turn now the role of fixed cost in the long run. The long run analysis assuming complete adaptability of plant and enterprise cannot regard any cost as being, but it cannot discrete any part of average total unit cost. Average total unit cost includes beyond question the expenses which at a given moment from the short run point of views are fixed. The long run analysis compressing a theory of investment and reinvestment postulates as a condition of equilibrium, and therefore has a ruling tendency that not only marginal cost but also average total unit cost be equal to price. But it must not be overlooked that it is not the actual historical fixed outlay, which is a part of total cost curve, but always a prospective cost, and that this may be entirely different from historical cost. Different size and different type and different cost of plant and machinery is needed, different rate of interest and like to give the prospective fixed cost and therefore to the total cost curve an altered position. And what is in a relevant average total cost unit and curve is never the rate of contracted investment and the value of durable goods to the current rent, and the average total cost inclusive of rent fulfills the condition of equating cost to price, but that is a mere analytical convention and not a fact. Such total cost is not the total expense of real business. The actual historically fixed charges are what businessmen call fixed cost, and producers and economists desire to see lowered, is no part of the price system in the short run or in the long term. Sorry, in the long run. Thank you.